In today's video, I'm going to show you the correct way to learn the pronunciation of words. Okay, so let's start with what not to do. If you're learning words, that you will notice that a lot of the time, the way a word sounds in English is very different from your language. As an adult, what happens with your brain is it's already got quite a few fixed patterns of what's a sound and what's not. I remember when I tried to learn how to say thank you in Cantonese, I think the pronunciation was something like goi or something like that. I can't remember because it's been a long time, but it took me quite a while to understand that the was also a sound. It was not just noise. But when a sound doesn't exist in your first language, your brain will do one of two things. It will either take that sound and convert it to a more similar sound, which means even if you hear perfect pronunciation, you could still identify it incorrectly, or it will simply identify that sound as noise, and therefore you won't even notice that there's a sound there. Now, here's what it's problematic if you start listening to words in English and writing their pronunciation the way it sounds to you with the sounds of your language. One of the main things about improving your listening and your speaking is getting acquainted with the sounds of English that don't exist in your first language. One of the exercises you need to do alongside with your teacher is learn how to identify sounds that are new and how to produce them. If you write things in the way they sound to you in your native language, you're going to be much more confident because you're going to know how to pronounce it, but it's very likely that you will pronounce these sounds incorrectly if that sound doesn't exist in your first language. So what you can do to improve that is create a little code for the sounds that don't exist, just so that you know when you're writing that sound, you know that you're not just approximating, that you acknowledge there's a difference. What I like to do with my students is a bit of training. I use a book called Learner English. So if you take Learner English, it's a book which was intended for teachers, but it will show you many of the sounds of it. Will show you the correspondence of sounds between English and many different languages. I take this book and I usually show my learners the sounds that don't exist in their first languages, just so that they are aware that there might be nuances in English that don't exist in their first language. A fun fact for you, English has more vowel sounds than most European languages. So that means if you're learning English as a second language or as a foreign language and you speak a European language, it is very likely that there will be a number of sounds that you've never heard before. So before you just go on approximating everything and struggling to hear what people are saying and pronouncing things incorrectly, my advice is try and get exposure to the sounds of English that don't exist in your first language. It will make your exercise of learning much more effective. The second thing that's very important with English pronunciation is allow yourself to make mistakes. The reason why I'm saying that is because English is not like other languages. I remember when I started to learn Italian, I thought it was fascinating how you could learn the letter combinations of Italian, and you would know how to pronounce every single word in Italian. I thought it was just beautiful to have a language that worked like that, because that's not how English goes. So with English, you can have a lot of variation in pronunciation. The way the letters of sound when they are part of the alphabet is not necessarily the same way they will sound when they're part of a word. And sometimes when you include a word in a sentence, you will change their pronunciation as well. So the main thing is that you learn patterns. For example, let's take double S. So I know there are 3 ways to pronounce double S. You can pronounce it as a sh, such as in the word passion. You can pronounce it as a s, such as in the word kiss. And you can pronounce it as a Z, such as in the word possessive. Actually, possessive has both sounds. When I see a word and I've never seen it before, I'll usually try to pronounce the double S as an S, because I've heard double S enough times now that I can actually tell that most of the time double S will have an S sound. If it doesn't work, I try another pronunciation based on other words that I know until it works. There's no other way to perfect your pronunciation in English. That's not trying. If you want to learn how to pronounce every single sound, it's just going to be very difficult, and it will also mean that every time you learn a new word, you will not know how to pronounce it. What you will see when you're communicating with people is that if you pronounce something incorrectly and you try again, usually in the second attempt, you're either doing it correctly or the person shows you the correct pronunciation and you learn. It's very unfortunate that the way we teach and learn English is not favorable to making mistakes. We get punished for not doing things perfectly. But with English pronunciation, the most important thing is to not let pronouncing things wrong get in the way of you trying again. Because remember, most of the people who you will talk to will not really care about what kind of accent you have. They just want to communicate with you, and they will be happy to help you. If you're communicating with people who are judging you based on the fact that you have an accent in English, that person is probably not a very interesting person to be friends with and talk to. And also, just remember, if you have an accent, it means you're bilingual. So congratulations. Another thing that really helps if you want to improve your pronunciation and listening is not learn only loose words. So when you learn to pronounce a word, make sure you see that word in context as well. The reason why I'm saying this is because English is what we call a stress-timed language. Stress-timed language means that different words have a different level of importance in a sentence. So that means if you have words which carry content, if that word is a noun or a verb or an adverb or an adjective, if they describe something which can be seen, or the way you do something, or an object, these words will be pronounced very loudly and very clearly. But words which are not content, such as prepositions and auxiliary verbs, will have their pronunciation reduced. By reducing pronunciation, you change that word, you change the way that word sounds almost completely sometimes. So that means if you learn, for example, the word of, when placed in a sentence, that word might actually sound like an So we have, for example, couple of tea, but some people will say cup of tea. So it just became an That getting exposed to that, to how function words get pronounced in a sentence, will help you improve your listening a lot. Another very important thing to consider is that when we're speaking fast in English, we also connect words. So whenever you have a word ending in a consonant and the next word starting with a vowel, these two words will get connected. You will pronounce them together. So that means one of the things you can do is try and read from a page, for example, and see how well you can connect words when reading. When you improve your way of pronouncing these connections, you get much better at understanding them. My favorite example of that is I work in an office. A lot of the time people will say, I work in an office. I work in an office. So what you will see is we have a few content words, so they're reduced, and we also have consonant, vowel, they get connected. So if you're expecting people to pronounce everything separately, just know it won't always happen. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the time people say, but I simply can't understand what people are saying in the movies and stuff. They're probably not used to performing connections between words. A very important thing that happens with reduction is what we do with auxiliary verbs. So auxiliary verbs, they do not carry meaning. They just form a structure. So they get reduced. So for example, instead of have, a lot of the time we'll say v or even a. So for example, I have been to New York. A lot of the time people will say, I've been. Or you should have done your homework. A lot of the time people will say, you should have done. You should have done, or you should have done. All auxiliary verbs are reduced in connected speech. Many people think it's optional to reduce auxiliary verbs, but you have to be careful, because if you pronounce the auxiliary verb in full, you might make a change in the meaning of what you said, which means the person who's talking to you might struggle to understand what you mean with what you're saying.